Living the Science of Mind, page 58, A Brief History of New Thought. The term New Thought refers to the modern metaphysical movement whose philosophy teaches that we are living in a spiritual universe here and now. There are quite a number of such movements. They all base their belief on the theory that the universe is a system of intelligence, the movement of which is law, the intelligence being personal and the law impersonal. In reality, New Thought is rather a poor term, since most of the ideas held in it are hoary with age. Much has been borrowed from all ancient cultures, from the teaching of the mystics of the Middle Ages and from Emerson. The different groups, however, all unite on one common basis when it comes to using the principle of intelligence that they believe in for definite purposes, or for what we call treatment, meditation, or affirmative prayer. The original sources of spiritual inspiration are almost identical, even though they spring from different cultures and from different ages over a long period of time. We are not particularly interested in where the forerunners of this movement came from or what their personal backgrounds may have been. Neither are we interested in their personalities. What we seek to discover is something beyond this, what they believed in and why they have left such a mark on the history of the evolution of spiritual thought, particularly in America. For it is really in this country that the New Thought movement originated. No doubt it began with the life and teaching of Phineas P. Quimby, 1802 to 1866. Probably one of the few original thinkers of the ages. Through a process of thought and experiment, he came to believe that mind is matter in solution and matter is mind in form. We are not so much interested in how he arrived at these conclusions as we are in the conclusions themselves, because the entire New Thought movement is very largely founded on his philosophy. It was Quimby who first spoke of the Christ principle, or the science of Christ. It was he who first called Jesus a scientific as well as an inspired soul. He said that mind as form and mind as solution are one and the same thing, perhaps in the same sense that Einstein says that energy and mass are equal, identical, and interchangeable. But Quimby didn't stop here. He said that mind is matter or form and mind is solution or an invisible essence are controlled by what he called a superior wisdom, which Jesus understood. He called this the science of Christ. He taught that mind or intelligence, in its dual form of the visible and the invisible, constitutes the sole and only substance in the universe. This concept was no different from that of Spinoza, who said, "I do not say that mind is one thing and matter is another thing. I say they are the same thing." Quimby believed that there is spiritual perfection at the center of everything, just as all the spiritual geniuses have believed. He believed that there is a perfect human standing back of all of our trouble, sickness, and confusion. He said that he could sometimes see this person, but that this person is surrounded by the opinions of the world, and these beliefs take form in the physical body as disease. That which was so revolutionary in the philosophy of Quimby was his belief in that all disease is a result of the misuse of the mind principle, that disease is not separate from the mind, but is mind in form. And since it is mind in form, mind can change it through thought or, as we would say, through the law of mind in action. He drew no line between disease as a condition and the thought which produced the condition, because the thought and the thing are one and the same. This is what it is important to remember, because it is basic to all New Thought teachings. Quimby reasons that since disease is a belief or an opinion, it can be changed through changing the belief or opinion. He was not afraid of either because he knew that they were mind. He did not say that they did not exist, for he never denied the reality of disease. He said, I appear as an attorney for my patient who is the plaintiff, and I explain that he is suffering from a false belief. Quimby reasons that since disease is a belief or an opinion, it can be changed through changing the belief or the opinion. He was afraid of neither because he knew that they were mind. He did not say that they did not exist, for he never denied the reality of disease. He said, I appear as an attorney for my patient who is the plaintiff, and I explain that they are suffering from a false belief. They are a spiritual being, and all these opinions that are held against them have no right to be. Then he said, you ask me what is my cure, and I answer that my explanation is the cure. For if I have completely explained the disease away, then the patient will not have it. He taught that a series of affirmations and denials leading to an inward spiritual realization can heal physical disease because disease is thought, while back of it there is a spiritual perfection which is not changed because God's work is already done and it leaves it to humanity to work out our own salvation. He also taught that statements of truth work like exact laws of mathematics, while statements of error or untruth work like laws of chance. This was Quimby's teaching, his method, and his treatment. We are interested in what he believed, what he taught, and how he used it, because without knowing it, he was the originator of the New Thought movement in America. Many people believe that Emerson was the father of New Thought. He did teach that God is the parent of all people, and he did reiterate the spiritual philosophy of the ages, but there is no evidence that he had the slightest concept of reducing this theory to a definite concept which could be practiced. Quimby passed on in 1866 after having healed thousands of people who came to him from all over the country. A record of his conversations, discussions, and letters was kept and published under the title The Quimby Manuscripts. After his passing, what is now known as the New Thought movement actually got underway. We need mention only a few of the various units of this movement. Let us start with the Unity School of Christianity, one of the greatest spiritual institutions in the world, and one which has helped millions of people. This movement, originated by Charles Fillmore and his wife Myrtle in Kansas City, is built largely on Fillmore's book Christian Healing and on Lessons in Truth by Emily Cady. We are not interested in their theology or their particular religious outlook, but in what they taught and demonstrated. We come back to the same proposition. There is a spiritual center in everything. The principle of mind or spirit governs everything, and a series of affirmations and denials will build up a healing consciousness, which they called the Christ consciousness. However, it could just as well have been called the Buddhic consciousness or the Tao, which means the way. Belonging to the Christian faith, the Unity School calls it the Christ consciousness and affirms that a series of arguments leading to the conclusion that humanity is perfect and governed by divine harmony will produce a definite result. Now, let us turn to the Divine Science Church, which has had a profound influence in the last 2 generations. It was founded by Fanny B. James in Denver. As we study the textbook upon which this teaching is based and other contemporary writings, we find the same things that Quimby taught. There is a slight difference in theology and spiritual outlook, but when it comes to the use of the principle, they are identical. The Church of Truth, one of the lesser of the new spiritual movements, has been both helpful and effective in its work. One of these movements is just as effective as another when it comes to practice, since they all teach the same thing, whether they know it or not. We find them all going back to the same system of affirmations and denials, which, when effective, culminate in the same realization. Among the earlier teachers was Emma Curtis Hopkins, who taught what she called high mysticism. She had perhaps more individual students than any one teacher, at least several thousand, one of whom was this writer. She had a high degree of cosmic consciousness, which one could feel. Many of the outstanding leaders in the New Thought movement came under her tutelage. Her method was distinctly one of mysticism, but when it is boiled down to practice and all extraneous material is taken out, we find the same systems of affirmations and denials. Other great leaders were Christian D. Larson, Orison Swett Marden, and Ralph Waldo Tryon. No other three persons have had more influence in the New Thought field because of the extensive distribution of their books, actually millions of copies, putting them in the same category with the Unity movements. We find that these three men, when it came to actual practice, taught exactly the same thing: argument or affirmations and denials, building up to a realization. This movement of New Thought spread to England, and many learned teachers appeared there, probably the two most influential being F.L. Rawson and Thomas Troward. I consider Troward's writings to be the most profound spiritual abstractions of modern times. He taught very little about the application of his belief to practical matters, but he did present the principle. One can only deduce that it would have been used. One can only deduce that it would have to be used just as in all the other teachings. Rawson developed a most elaborate system of practice, which he and his followers apparently thought to be quite different from the others, since they called it absolute science. This really means nothing because all science is absolute. The thought that 2 and 2 are 4 is absolute. Rawson's book, Life Understood, has been read by many thousands of persons. It is a compilation of varied forms of the New Thought movement. He wrote an elaborate book on treatment, covering practically everything anyone can think of. But when we come to the method, it is identical with other New Thought teachings. It is what it would have to be. Meanwhile, here in America, a man by the name of Edwin Burrell developed what he called the axioms of truth and reason. The presentation of his philosophy was quite involved, fairly interesting, but confusing to most people. Students came to him from across the country, and no doubt they received great benefit because he was a great man. But when it comes to the actual practice, we return to the same fundamental proposition of affirmations, denials, and realization. This is a brief and very inadequate outline of the New Thought movement in America. However, it does touch the high spots of a certain wave of spiritual progress over a period of nearly 100 years, culminating in the beginning of what is probably the greatest spiritual inquiry the world has ever made. One thing we should remember is that during this process, other similar movements arose in America: spiritualism, theosophy, occult and esoteric teachings, yogic and Hindu philosophy, all of which have had some influence on the whole metaphysical fields. But these movements have little relationship to practical application, even though some of them are very profound and all of them are interesting. If it had not been for spiritualism, we probably would not have Dr. Ryan's experiments in extrasensory perception at Duke University. If it had not been for the New Thought movement, we surely would not have had the modern message that is coming into many of the more liberal churches. The whole mass of thinking has been profoundly influenced by these movements, and today you seldom pick up a newspaper or magazine without finding some reference to them. It was because of many years spent by this writer in studying these movements, trying to be partial to none and impersonal to all, that religious science in the the science of mind came into being, not as something better than any one of them, but rather as the synthesis of all of them, starting with the proposition that spiritual truth cannot belong to any one individual, but being universal in its essence, must belong to anyone who uses it.